Di tengah situasi perekonomian dunia yang mengalami tren pelemahan, kita perlu berupaya meningkatkan kerjasama ekonomi dengan banyak mitra, termasuk dengan Belanda. Bidang perdagangan kita sepakat untuk terus meningkatkan perdagangan yang terbuka dan fair. Sampaikan apresiasi kepada pemerintah Belanda yang secara konsisten tegas menghormati kedaulatan negara Republik Indonesia.
Jika saya menyebut dua kata, Indonesia, Belanda, apa yang ada di benak pikiran Anda? Penjajahan atau kolonialisme? Mungkin itu yang menjadi top of mind kebanyakan orang Indonesia. Memang itu fakta sejarah yang tidak boleh dilupakan sama sekali. Namun sebagai bangsa yang besar, seperti kita Indonesia, tentu tidak boleh selalu terjebak di masa lalu. Banyak bangsa besar di Eropa, di Barat, di Timur, atau negara-negara lain pernah mengalami kolonialisme, justru bisa bangkit dan menjadi negara yang besar dan maju karena mereka menghargai sejarah kelamnya. Sekarang saya akan mewawancarai Perdana Menteri Belanda, Rutte, yang kebetulan sekarang sedang berkunjung di Indonesia. Saya ingin minta perspektifnya akan Indonesia, yang sekarang bukan lagi menjadi negara jajahan Belanda, tetapi menjadi mitra strategis di banyak bidang. Welcome back to Jakarta, Prime Minister.
Good to be back.
Good to be back. This is not your first official visit.
My third.
Right. Yeah,
No.
Your third. 3 times in the past 6 years.
Yes.
How important is Indonesia to your government?
Very important. Very important. It is one of the leading nations in this part of the world. It's now firmly part of the G20. You have overtaken the Netherlands in terms of overall GDP. So the overall wealth of the country is now bigger than my country, and we like to work together. We have a strong bond, and we like to, on that basis, work further.
Because 3 times in the past 6 years, I have a lot of questions on my head. Which aspects do you think can rebuilding the partnership between these countries?
Well, today I had a couple of meetings. Of course, my meeting with the president was very pleasant, very successful. And we are basically focusing on 2 issues. One is where can we work together? And that is in terms of port development, water management, waste management. How do we take care of health sector? But also increasingly we are more and more focusing on climate change and how to do that. Second issue is how, as regional powers, the Netherlands in the European Union, Indonesia in Asia, in ASEAN, the biggest country in ASEAN.
Yes.
We are not the biggest country in the European Union, of course. We are the 5th biggest from the 27. But how can we make sure that these 2 multilateral organizations, EU and ASEAN, are really benefiting our countries, our citizens, but also how can they work together in a world which is increasingly moving away from these type of multilateral organizations?
With the European organization and the other EU countries, actually. You have met President Joko this morning in the Bogor. What was the result, beside that you have told before, but is there any new topics or discussions?
We constantly have new topics, but what this meeting was particularly focusing on, how can we accelerate delivery on what we agreed in 2016. He was then president in his first term. We agreed a number of MOUs, so basically we put on paper where we would like to work together, very practical stuff. And how can we speed up? How can we accelerate implementation? But also talking about him being a member of the G20, we have been invited the last 3 times into the G20 meetings. What can we do more on the world stage? I was fascinated by the way at the moment how Indonesia is really trying to influence decision making in ASEAN. For example, on the Indo-China strategy, on the regional strategy in general, which is now very much taken on board by the 10 ASEAN countries as their collective strategy. And of course also how can we work together between the EU and ASEAN. But also very practical things like how do we deal with threats to society. For example, how do we deal with the returns from foreign terrorist fighters who have been in other parts of the world? And how do we make sure that our societies stay safe? This is why we work together. This is why I asked my national coordinator on terrorism to join me in this visit, and he will travel to Australia later this week. He will have meetings tomorrow here in Jakarta and then travel.
One of your agenda in Jakarta is to meet our youth, especially our students who are studying in Netherlands. Why are you interested to meet them?
They are the future, and we have they're the future. We have now 15. You and I are not the future. They are the future.
They're the future.
We are too old. We can still teach them, but they are the future. And we have now 1,500 Indonesian students each year. And conversely, we have many people from the Netherlands studying here in Indonesia. And that is a rich source of insight. Some movies have been made about this. Very funny stuff has been written about the cultural differences and how we deal with this. And when I bike around town in The Hague, many cases I find Indonesian students, hey, Prime Minister, can we make a picture? And where are you from? Indonesia, of course. And it's always great fun because they are very much, they're very highly liked in the Netherlands. We love them.
But what is your biggest expectation from them?
Well, I think the biggest issue our two societies are facing, next to, of course, this very troublesome issue of fighting terrorism, is how to fight the climate change. And the sinking of Jakarta is a fact, of course, which we all have to acknowledge, and we can only fight that by climate adaptation. We have to adapt to that. We can help there, but we can also learn from what you are doing and apply that in the Netherlands. But of course, the climate mitigation, so to fighting the CO2 emissions and making sure that we have ambitious level of how to deal with the climate change issue, I think is the biggest thing on our joint agenda at the moment, and is also in the near future, in the longer future, the biggest source of jobs, earning money, both here in Indonesia as well as in the Netherlands. And there our historical ties make us nobody can compete with us. That combination is so strong, and we have so much history together that when we start to deal with this issue, we can really show the rest of the world some examples of how to do that.
Yeah. What about on the maritime sector? Because you visited the Maritime Vocational Training Center in Bogor, as you already know, Indonesia, under President Jokowi's administration, very puts forward to all the things on maritime sectors. And as we already know, you are the leading nation on maritime sector, especially on the technology. What do you think? How do you see the efforts that have been made by the Indonesian government so far, going so far?
Well, first of all, let me say that President Jokowi's program of investing in logistics, in infrastructure is commendable, is huge. It's really big what he is doing. Look here at Jakarta, all the projects going on around this city. It's totally different from 3 or 6 years ago when I first visited. Particularly now, he is very much focused, of course, on port development, and there we can help. Rotterdam is the biggest port in Europe. It was once the biggest port in the world, but then, of course, Singapore and ports in China became bigger. But still,
you have all the technology.
We think we have, but hey, watch out here. We also have to make sure that we don't lose our front position. So we also have to constantly adapt and innovate what we are doing, and we can learn from what is happening here. So we are trying to help with some of the port development programs here, and indeed another program President Jokowi is working on, of course, is developing the skill set of the Indonesian people, moving from only knowledge to applied knowledge and skills and how to apply it in real life. And part of that is this training center I visited this afternoon. Very practical, where people from Rotterdam are now training in how do you deal with a crane, how do you deal with a tugboat and all that in simulators. We brought in from Rotterdam. Fantastic. And young guys here. Well, these were all men, probably also women, but these were all men working on that training course and being highly inspired in doing that.
Yeah. Okay. My last question, Mr. Prime Minister, you have been familiar with Indonesia. I heard that your parents have lived here.
Yes.
And you are one of a fan of nasi goreng.
Absolutely. I eat Indonesian food at least twice a week.
Oh, really? Really? In Netherlands?
In Netherlands,
really?
yeah.
Really?
I live in The Hague, which is famous for its Indonesian.
Okay, okay. If you can describe Indonesia in a very short sentence, what is it?
Food, but first of all, people. Probably the nicest, welcoming people I know in the world. Very diverse, but at the end, very united in welcoming. But thirdly, this is a country where there's 250,000 people coming out of the Sukarno-Suharto political period. Now, since the late 90s, moving into a new phase in its development. You had an election. In one day, you counted all the votes. For 250,000 people, this was a record worldwide. Human rights. Of course, there are issues. I have to watch all the things about the student protests, etc. But that's also part of civil society. People protesting. I mean, in the Netherlands, I have people protesting. I never understand it because I think they all love the government. But in real life, they don't. They should protest. That's part of civil society. But that is something I really admire about Indonesia. How you move through the transition and really built a democracy here with rule of law, with human rights, indeed with a civil society which is also sometimes opposing the government, which is only healthy. And that makes this country, for me, all 6 of my 7 brothers and sisters were born here.
Really?
I was the only one born in the Netherlands.
Really?
Yeah. And so I was raised with all these stories about the beautiful country. But I started to visit it as Prime Minister. But this makes it so special.
Okay, Mr. Prime Minister Mark Rutte, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful talk. Enjoy Jakarta.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. See you next time.
See you. National Counterterrorism Agency also joined the meeting in Bogor this morning. We have the same issues on tackle terrorism, extremism, and let alone immigrant for your country and other European countries. What can be done actually by the two countries on this issue?
First of all, learn from each other, because you, of course, have gone through some horrific phases. 10 years ago, in 2010, I mean, and also around that year, you have really gone through some horrific moments, and the whole world has been watching that.
Yeah, starting in 2002 in Bali.
And it started in 2002 in Bali, basically starting from that moment. So learning how Indonesia is coping with deradicalization, how do you take care of foreign terrorist fighters returning to Indonesia, but also more practical things like how to deal with cybercrime, how to make sure that extremism doesn't get a hold on society in the sense that it can be a terrorist threat to society. And indeed, the crucial thing, the crucial discussions we need to have on how to make sure that when people return home, that they do not pose a threat to society. Of course, the legal system can only keep them off the street for so long. But then at the moment they will return to the streets, and how to make sure that they don't pose a threat to society by then.
We don't have an issue with the immigrants, but you do have in the Netherlands. Do you believe that the immigrants, especially from Muslim countries, are the biggest problem for the extremism?
No, I don't think that. No. Let's never make the mistake of thinking that Muslim migration has anything to do with extremism.
Yeah.
No, there is an issue of people who are trying to find shelter against dictatorships and prosecution in countries like Syria. And I think that it's up to the rest of the world, and particularly the countries who want to to deliver a positive force to society and the world society as a whole, we have to stand accountable and to help there.
Yeah.
Of course, the problem was in 2015 and 16 that too many from Syria were coming to Germany and Sweden and the Netherlands, and therefore we had to find a practical solution in making an agreement with Turkey and the European Union on creating a refugee shelter facility in Turkey. I mean, this is practical. So I think we should never try to combine the two issues of migration in general. That's one thing. And yes, there is the issue of terrorism and extremism. And that is a separate issue which we have to fight separately. But if you start to combine the two, you would say to people of good faith who want to add to society that there might be a potential threat. I mean, that's exactly the wrong way to deal with this.
So do you consider soft approach rather than hard approach to tackle those issues?
Well, you need everything. I mean, and this is why we work together. This is why I took asked my national coordinator on terrorism to join me in this visit, and he will travel to Australia later this week. He will have meetings tomorrow here in Jakarta and then travel with me to Australia. Because there is so much we can learn from each other and where we have to focus on collectively. But it is everything. It is preventing people from going into extremist thoughts, and particularly then, of course, even worse in terrorist activities, whilst at the same time making sure that society stays safe from people returning.
We have very strong emotional ties between both countries on our very long ups and downs relationships, maybe for a couple centuries. In which aspects do you think we can collaborate to bring an advantage for our people, for both countries?
Well, this is exactly the point. I think the President and I were making today. There is this shared history. Indonesia is now almost 75 years independent. 74 years this year, 75 years next year. So this is so long ago. But that history, of course, is there. But it also provides an opportunity because we know each other. We have been working for a very long time together. And what I find is that since 10, 15, 20 years, that relationship is now very much focusing on the future. How can we, Indonesia, with a quarter of a billion people living here, one of the biggest countries in the world, and the Netherlands, which has some advantages in terms of our innovation and research capacity, how can we work together? And how can we make sure that both of our societies profit from this? And some of these are the traditional ones, agricultural sector, port development, for example, water management. I mean,
education.
These have been part of our relationship for 300-400 years now. But now in a very modern, forward-looking way. And we need to learn from you guys. Because how you tackle climate change, how you deal with, for example, here in Jakarta, where you have this issue of the fact that every year this city is confronted with the fact that Jakarta is sinking. And
especially
how can we
in the north area.
So we can learn from that. We can also help you with our latest insights in terms of how to deal with the adaptation and mitigation issues around this fact. And I think collectively that is a fantastic opportunity where we can also earn a lot of money. And get many people employed, both here in Indonesia as well as in the Netherlands. When I bike around town in The Hague, in many cases I find Indonesian students, hey, Prime Minister, can we make a picture? Where are you from? Indonesia, of course. And it's always great fun because they are very much, they're very highly liked.